An important part of coding web pages is ensuring your code is well formatted and error-free. An important tool that we have to do this is by using validators. Validation can be defined as the process of validating web elements for any syntax or format errors. Errors may not always present themselves visually in the browser, but they can ultimately cause issues depending on the version of the browser or the language that you're viewing the website in, and at the least, it makes your code look sloppy and unthorough. Your goal as a web developer is to create well-formatted, semantic, clean code. Validators are your friend when it comes to this. The HTML validator is used to validate the syntax errors. These are things like missing quotation marks, open tags, and unnecessary blank spaces. These can all cause the web page to look different from which the developer has originally intended it to look. If we have to validate HTML web elements manually, it's a very tough and time-consuming job, and there's a huge chance that you might miss the mistake. After all, you probably inadvertently made the mistake, right? In addition to creating valid HTML, you'll also want to validate your CSS, the cascading style sheets. The more you code, the more chance that you have errors in your code. So making validation and debugging part of your development process is always advisable. When you use the validator, you'll have the following benefits. Increased web accessibility. If your HTML code is clear, then it can avoid certain blocks or issues which restrict the user to search the site or can affect the accessibility of a website. Page loading is much faster. If the unwanted code is removed, then it makes the code base small so the application will load faster. Load shed on servers. Good and error-free code reduces the space required and the cost as well. Compatibility of browsers. There may be a possibility that the current code works fine in one browser, but it shows some unexpected outcomes in other browsers. So in order to make sure that your website is compatible on all platforms and all browsers, HTML validation is advised before deployment. If the code is validated for compatibility issues, then it avoids the risk of any browser issues. Let me show you how we can go about validating our code. Here I have our web page that we built in a previous exercise. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select all of the code on this page and copy it. There are a number of validators out there. I'm going to share two which I like with you. The first one is html5.validator.new. It is possible to put in a URL if your website is being hosted on the web. Since we are developing locally, we cannot use this. You can use file upload and browse on your computer and upload the file. I personally find it faster to use the text field. As you can see, some pre-entered text will exist. We need to get rid of this, so I'm going to select all of this and delete it, and then I'll use the keyboard shortcut of Command or Control Paste to paste in my code, and now I'll click Validate. When you validate, if your page is correct, you should get this box with the green border that says that the document is valid HTML5 code. It is possible and quite common that you might get some warnings when you validate your code. It is worth noting that when you get the warning, it is a warning, not an error. It is useful to provide a heading for each sectioning element. It's not required, so it really depends on how you've built your website as to how this all should play out. As I mentioned, when you get a warning, note it, look at it, see if it's worth fixing, but you don't have to worry about it. Let me show you how our web page would compare if we have errors. I've taken the exact same page that we've built previously and purposely added some errors. I'm going to copy this code and I'll go ahead and put this in the validator and I'll click Validate. At this point, you're going to see that I get completely different results. I have a plethora of errors. It is worth noting that sometimes these errors can be a little bit cryptic. It's not always completely intuitive as to what they mean, but there is some good information that you can glean from the validator. I recommend that you work top down. sometimes errors that you've made on your page are going to compound and create additional errors. So right now, it really looks like we have a lot of errors. But once we start fixing these errors, you're going to see that we probably don't have to fix all 8 of them that are listed. They'll probably resolve themselves once we start fixing them. So start at the top one, and it's letting me know I have an error. The important information is that it tells me the line number, so I know that there's a problem on line 5. It's also going to highlight this bit of code, so I know the general vicinity of where the error is. Now for this particular problem, I have not closed my attribute values correctly, so I really need to have closing quotation marks here, and I need to have an opening quotation mark here. As soon as you make the fix, what I would recommend is selecting all of the code, copying it, and then coming back into the editor, select the existing code, delete it, and repaste in your modified code. Now, when we click validate, you're going to see that I've reduced the number of errors. So that error has now disappeared. Now I'll go to the next one. An image element must have an alt attribute. That one's pretty straightforward, and I know this is occurring on line 11. So if we come to line 11, lo and behold, here's my image, no alt attribute. So I'm going to go ahead and add an alt attribute. Once again, I would copy the code, come back to the validator, select the existing code and delete it, and then paste in my modified code. We've knocked out that error as well. Let's move on to the next one. Heading cannot be a child of another heading. This is occurring on line 13, and it has something to do with an H2. So if we go to line 13, it looks like my H2 is okay. This tag seems to be fine, but look, the closing tag is missing the /. So it's not technically a closing tag. So I'll save that, and we can come back here, and if you know where the mistake lies, you can just correct it. You don't always have to copy paste. Sometimes it's easier to copy paste. I'll click validate, and you can see that I've actually knocked out quite a few errors. Before, I had 6 errors. Now I'm down to 3. So just by fixing that one problem, I've eliminated 3 of the existing errors. That's why it's important to go through line by line and make the fix. Don't just try to look at all of these, because some of them might be compounded by previous errors. The next error, end tag main scene, but there were open elements. So this is occurring on line 56 and has something to do with main. If we come down to the bottom, here's my opening main tag, and here at line 56 is my closing main tag. Now that looks fine, so this might be a little perplexing. What could be wrong with main? Again, look around the area. In this case, if we move down to the next error, it says unclosed element article. This is occurring on line 51. Okay, so let's go to line 51. Here's my article, and it says I don't have a closing article. You can see what happened is that my closing article is outside of main. So this is the problem. If I get rid of the closing article and move it and put it where it should be, if we go ahead and select our code, copy it, come back to the validator and revalidate our code, you can see that I've knocked out all of the errors that I had previously, and now my document is valid. The other validator that I want to show you is validator.w3.org. It works very similarly. Again, I'm going to validate by direct input, and I'll just paste in the code that I had. At this point, our code should be correct. If I click check, you can see that it gives me some warnings, but the document checked completely. I'm going to go ahead and just make an error. So we'll get rid of the / on the H2. We'll click check again. And now you can see I have errors. So it works in a very similar manner. Either one of these validators is going to work just fine. I did want to show you that I loaded both of these pages. So here is my page without any errors. Here is my page with the errors. They look identical. Visually in the browser, we don't see any difference between the two pages. So just be aware that sometimes you might look at your page, but if you don't validate it, it still could have errors. The final step that I want to show you in regards to validation is something that you can install right inside of Atom. This is super helpful and I'm a big fan of using it. It's one of the packages. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my settings, and I'm using the keyboard shortcut of Command or Control, comma, which opens up my settings dialog box. I'm going to go down to Install, and we need to search for a package that is going to aid in validation. This particular package is called W3C-validation. If you search for that, you should see this package appear. I'm going to go ahead and click Install, and once the package has been installed, you'll want to go to Settings, and this is where you can adjust any of the settings. For the most part, everything is probably set the way you want, but I did want to point out where this is, and I just want to show you a little bit about it. First of all, you can specify what sort of CSS media you want Atom to validate. In this case, we're going to leave it at all. You can also specify a specific profile, so the different versions of CSS. I'm going to leave this as CSS3, and then you can go ahead and specify what sort of report you want. We're going to leave this at normal, and you can also choose to hide the panel if there's no errors, or change the way the panel displays. I do like to have my panel validate on save, so as soon as I save the page, it will validate. I feel like validate on change is a little too aggressive. It just happens too much. So again, I'm not changing anything here. I just wanted to show you where they were. Now that I have this installed, look what happens. I'm going to just do a couple of undos. I'm using the keyboard shortcut of Command or Control Z so I can get back to where my page was somewhat screwed up. So I'm just going to get rid of the changes that we had made. And now if I save this page, you're going to see that a bunch of errors show up. These are very similar to what we saw in the validator. It's just putting them right here in Atom. So this is kind of a one-stop area. And you can see it tells me that I have 8 errors, 0 warnings. So once again, line 5, this has something to do with our meta tag. If we come up here and we make the corrections to the meta tag and we save our page, now we're down to 7 errors. Now it's letting me know on line 11, the image must have an alt tag. So I'm going to come to line 11. I'm going to go ahead and add the alt tag. I'll save my page. And now we're down to 6 errors. And you'll just go through the page and make any corrections. So now you know a little bit about how the validator works. I just want to impress upon you that sometimes the message that the validator gets can be a little cryptic. So make sure that you're looking at the line number and then you're using your detective skills to figure out what the problem might be. Validating your code is an important debugging process. Even if the browsers visually render your code correctly, you could still have errors. Make validation part of your development process always. Your goal is to code correctly and error-free.